All right, so I've been playing with React Router v6, and I just put together this cool little demo using Tailwind UI of some nested routing. I want to show you how it works. You know, React Router v6 is not out yet. It's an alpha or beta, I'm not sure, but figured it'd be fun to play around with it. You know, I got the backwards hat on, so we're kind of in risky territory here, and I have to get to Penn Station at 5 o'clock for a train to Baltimore. So I'm going to Annapolis for the weekend, getting out of the city. And so, you know, why not try to record a video here with just a few hours left? I think we'll be all right because I just ran through it. It's really fun though. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This is a nav bar component from Tailwind UI. And I'm starting out here in a brand new Create React app with React Router installed, but it's not wired up yet. This is just some HTML, basically, just some plain JSX with some classes and Tailwind. Nothing works. If you click, you just see we go to some fake href here. And so our goal is to get all of this working. And in doing so, we're going to learn a little bit about some of the new goodies that are coming with React Router v6. So I think a good place to start would be to just get these links working. So let's just wire up some links and make it so that we can actually click on these and change the URL. So we can do that pretty easily if we come down to our anchor tags here. Let's go ahead and update these to link components. Now we need to go ahead and auto import these from React Router. And now we see that we're getting an error. We can only use these in the context of a router component. So real quick, we can pop up to our index.js file here. And let's go ahead and wrap this in a browser router, which is going to be an import here from React Router DOM. And now let's go back to our app. We can close this. And we're seeing that we're getting an error, cannot read property path name of undefined. That's because these links need a to prop. So let's go ahead and grab all these hrefs, which we're just gonna blow away. And for now, they can all link to the home page here. And now we have a working app. So let's go ahead and make some new links. This will go to /team. This will go to /projects. This will go to /calendar. And we'll leave dashboard here at /. And so boom, just like that, we can click around and get some links rendering. Now the first thing I want to do is get this active state styling working on these different nav links. So when we click on team, this should be indigo and underlined, and this should go away. So let's get that working. Now React Router comes with a component called Nav Link. So if I grab these and we go ahead and update these to Nav Link, looks like it didn't update these parts, but we can just do that manually here. We're going to see that's not defined, so we can come here and auto import that. And so nav links work kind of similar to links, but they give us this active class name attribute, which applies some classes only when the link is active. And so we can see here from our Tailwind classes, you know, this first dashboard link is getting the active treatment, and it has this border indigo and text gray. And then it goes to inline flex item center. And then all these inactive links get the text gray 500 with the hover treatment. And then they go to inline flex item center. So the inline flex and the rest of these classes are kind of the same, but this border and text gray are the active class treatment. So we can just grab that, slap it on all these links. And we'll also grab the inactive treatment here and throw it on our first link right here from the dashboard. And so coming back to our app, it seems like it's working a little bit here. There's some things going on. Well, first of all, the dashboard seems like it's always active. And second of all, we're getting this kind of weird hover style, which we weren't seeing in the static version, which came from Tailwind UI. So first, let's fix the fact that the dashboard is always active. And the reason that is because this nav link is going to /, and / is going to match on every one of these URLs. So really, we want this to be an exact match and only match when we're actually on the route. And the way we do that with this nav link is to say end is true. And you might see this called exact in other versions of React Router, but here it's called end, and it's just telling us we need to match all the way to the end. And so now we can see dashboard is only active on the root URL. So that's good. So we fixed that problem. So it seems like we're getting a little bit closer here. But again, we're running into the second issue, which is that our hover styles here are colliding with the active styles. So this is something I've run into in React Router and Reach Router, and a lot of these router libraries, is that when you're using them with functional CSS libraries like Tailwind, you're going to run into these collisions. So if we take a look at the DOM here, and we look at the second link under team, it has the active classes, the border indigo 500, but it also has these hover classes of border gray 300. So really this is not what we want. We want to be able to say these classes, apply them when we're active, and really we want to apply these classes only when we're inactive. So ideally we'd be able to grab these, have an inactive class name prop that looks something like that. And then these classes right here would be truly the base styles that apply in every situation. So let's go ahead and copy these and put it on all of our nav links here. And when we save this, if we take a look at our console, we're going to see that there's an error. React does not recognize the inactive class name prop on a DOM element. That's because Nav Link doesn't support inactive class name. This is not an API that Nav Link actually supports. So it's just forwarding it to the underlying anchor tag, and React is saying, well, that's not a thing on anchor tags. So what are you doing? And so now what we're going to do is actually rebuild Nav Link ourselves. And that's going to let us create this new API. And as we'll see, extend Nav Link even further, kind of in ways that suit our own use cases. So we're going to go ahead and just nuke this Nav Link import, and we're going to make our own Nav Link. And Nav Link is going to render a link. And so if we pass in the props and just forward them onto the link, then we'll see that the nav works. So under the hood, we're going to use this link to actually navigate, but we want to go ahead and add support for these other two APIs here, active class name and inactive class name. So really what we need is some concept of is active state, right? We need to know based on the to prop that we're passing into each one of these links, whether it's active based on the current URL location. So determine based on current location and to prop. So let's go ahead and grab the to prop, and then we'll just forward the rest on here to the link so that we can use to right here. And we're also going to want to pass in to the link as well. So if we save that, we should still be able to navigate, but we still don't see our active styles. So now how are we going to determine if this nav link is active or not? Well, React Router gives us this really handy hook called use location. So I can just hit enter, and this is going to return a location object. Let's go ahead and log it and take a look at it here in the console. So if we look at this log, we'll see it gives us this location object with a path name of /team, which is the current path name. And so as we navigate around, this hook is going to refire and give us the latest path name. So to start, we can just say, well, we're active if the location.pathname is equal to the to that we passed in, right? The to prop. And now that we know whether we're active or not, we can create kind of an all class names property, which is going to be the class name that we pull in. So let's go ahead and destructure class name, active class name, and inactive class name as well. And what's all class names? Well, it's going to be class name plus a new expression, right? If isActive is true, then we want to go ahead and append our active class name. Otherwise, we want to append our inactive class name. And now we have all of our class names here. We can say class name equals all class names. Looks like we're getting a warning here for our end attribute. Let's just go ahead and delete this for now since we're not using this anymore. And let's take a look. looks like our new all class names property here is working. And if we kind of zoom in, we don't see that bug anymore where we hover and we get the styles from the inactive state. So that's pretty cool. Just like that, we've been able to make our own version of Nav Link here that uses this hook and the toProp. And now we can just very easily use inactive class name. So this is pretty awesome. Now, again, like I said, I've done this with a bunch of different of these routing libraries, Reach Router, etc. And if you are working with Tailwind or a functional library, it's really good to have an API that supports inactive class name, just to make sure to take time and figure out how to do it in whatever library you're using, because you don't want to deal with conflicting class names. This will really save you a lot of headaches in the future. So I really like this API. It's very simple and straightforward. But let's keep going and build out some more of this navigation here. And to start, we want to actually change this title, this content here, as we navigate around the app. So right now it just says dashboard. Let's come and make this dynamic. And so the way we're going to do that is by right here. This is where the content for the actual page here starts. We want to kind of slot in our dynamic content right here. So let's pull this out and we'll just put this down here for a second. And right here, we're going to render our routes. And this is also going to auto import from React Router. And in here, we're going to render a list of routes. So we have 4 routes: dashboard, team, projects, and calendar. We can render these like this. We can say this will live at our route path, and the element it will render is going to be, to start, just a p tag that says dashboard. I think this is saying it's not defined, so we can go ahead and import that. And we're going to have team, projects, and calendar. Team, projects, and calendar. And so that's kind of how that API works. We render our routes wherever we want the dynamic content to change. And then whichever route best matches based on the path and the current location, well, then React Router is going to go ahead and render the corresponding element. So instead of just rendering p tags, let's use this kind of page level component here from Tailwind UI. Let's just call this a page, and it will return some elements here. Let's wrap this in a div. And let's make this take in a title, and we'll just use the title prop just like that. And so now this guy can render a page with a title of dashboard. And same for these. We'll render a page with a title of team, projects, and calendar. And I think we need to close off this guy right here. So now we have this page treatment back, but we actually have a dynamic title. So that's pretty cool. And our link styles still look great. Let's keep going here and add some children routes to our dashboard. So with React Router, we can add child routes that are nested. And so right now these are all self-closing, but we're just going to make them take in a block here like this. And right here, we can just render more routes. So let's say we had in our dashboard right here, we had something like an overview. So we'll say, let's render out a p tag that says overview. At the root, we'll render out a new users page here @/new users, and maybe like a sales path here as a third child of our dashboard. So we refreshed, our app refreshed here, and we're still at the root, but we're not seeing this overview rendering anywhere. And that's because we haven't told React Router where to put it. Right now, we have this kind of parent routes wrapper, which is just going to render the first match. But because this is nested routing, we are rendering the page right here. And so React Router is just rendering what we told it to, which is just this block of JSX, but we need to tell it kind of where to put the dynamic content. And so right here, this is the div with the dotted line on it. And we can tell React Router to put the dynamic content right in here using the new outlet component. So if we go ahead and auto import that, now we're going to see overview being rendered inside of this dotted line here. And let's go ahead and remove this dotted line. There's overview, and let's go to /new users, /new users. And now we see new users right there. And so kind of as we go forward and back, we see the nested routing happening here. Now let's give our users some navigation so that we can actually click links and get to these nested child routes more easily than typing these paths in the URL. So to start, instead of just rendering this page, let's make a new kind of specific component called dashboard. And we'll use this to actually render our dashboard route right here. So instead of just rendering this generic page, we will render a dashboard component. And to start, let's just copy the page component and render dashboard right here. Okay, so we are back to where we were before, but we can actually render some nav. So I have kind of another chunk of HTML here from Tailwind UI, which gives us this nav component and some links with just some classes. It's basically all it is. And so you can see here, it's kind of this tab treatment. And we only have 3 child routes. So we can update this to be 3 links that correspond up here to our new child paths of overview, new users, and sales. And now, just like before, let's go ahead and turn these into actual links. But we can update these to be our own Nav Links. And the hrefs we will update to be the 2 prop here. And the first one will navigate to /. The second one will go ahead and match these right here, new users. And the third one will match sales. Now when we click, we're actually navigating here, and we're seeing the content being slotted into the outlet that we copied from our dashboard here. But the active state is not working, and that's because we're not using active class name. So let's fix that. It looks like the third tab here has the active treatment. And so that's going to be this text gray 700 and background gray. So let's grab that, slap it on active class name equals just like that. And up here we see the inactive treatment is going to be text gray 500 and this hover class of gray 700. So inactive class name is equal to that. So let's bring that down here and just copy this to all 3 of these. And of course we could pull these, if I were working in a real app, we could pull these into some sort of tab, Nav Link, or, or tabs component. But for now, I'm just kind of keeping it simple so we can focus on the routing here. And we'll check that out. We got this active state here. So now we've got the secondary nav working. We still have our primary nav working. But it looks like we have broken something here. And that is when we're not on the root route, our dashboard global nav, our header nav right here, is no longer active, even though conceptually we are still in the dashboard. And so we would want that to be highlighted. So that's what we're going to fix next. But it is cool that the Nav Link so far is working for both levels of navigation here. We didn't really have to change anything to get it to work at this level. So if we can fix this bug, then we'll be in good shape. So what is going on here? Well, if we scroll up to our actual app, we're rendering this Nav Link to the dashboard with a 2 of /. And, in our Nav Link component, we're just checking whether 2 is equal to the current path name of the location. And so as soon as it's not going to be active. So there's a couple different ways you could think about solving this. First, what if our dashboard was actually at /dashboard? So let's say that this went to /dashboard. And then we were to come down to our route here and mount this at dashboard. And so now when we click on this, we're at /dashboard, and well, these are broken right now as well. So we'll have to come to our links and tell each one of them, go ahead and add the prefix as well, because these are the child routes. So now we are kind of in this new hierarchy, and I think we need to remove the trailing slash here. We're in this new hierarchy where everything is mounted at dashboard. So you could imagine us updating our Nav Link code here to say something like, all right, let's make sure that, you know, as long as the URL starts with this, then we can go ahead and match. And that way we'll match all three of these states right here because they all have /dashboard in it, right? We could add something like a starts with prop, you know, and I've done this before. And that's kind of an interesting solution that can kind of get you unstuck sometimes. And in this case, it would actually, you know, work for us. But let's take the harder case, right? So if we undo all this and we go back to dashboard being mounted at the root of the application here, which is totally a viable thing to do and is really more of a product decision, what you want to be at the root, than a technical decision, we should be able to make this work. And we can see that in some routing configurations, the URL doesn't actually contain enough information to tell us whether a particular URL should be active or not. So we can't, just by looking at the URL and the to prop here, determine whether a link should have the active or inactive class applied to it, because it's just too ambiguous, right? But somehow React Router is able to determine, hey, when we're on /, we should be rendering the dashboard, and we should also be rendering the overview child route, right? So if you look at this configuration right here, React Router can look at all of these routes that are provided and say, for a given URL, what is the best path through this entire router configuration? So React Router is doing some additional computation here to determine which path is active and which set of routes is the active path through this whole hierarchy. And really what we want is to write our Nav links to have their active status determined in the same way that React Router is determining which route should be active for a given URL. That way, the notion of this thing being active is going to be lined up with what React Router is actually rendering in our outlets in all the dynamic parts of our app. And so fortunately for us, they expose some cool hooks that let us do just that. So in order to take advantage of these cool primitives, we actually have to just do a little bit of refactoring. And we're going to start by pulling out our routes from JSX right here and making them just a plain JavaScript array of routes. So let me show you what I mean. Let's start with just our 4 kind of top level routes like this, just to keep it simple. And I'm literally just going to say const routes equals, it's an array of routes, and these are going to be objects with a path key and an element key. And for the element, we don't need this JSX right here or right here. And we can close off the object just like that. So this is just a JavaScript array of objects with a path and element property. Let's go ahead and comment this out. And instead, we're going to use a new hook called useRoutes. That's going to auto import up here, right there. And if we take a look at this, we see that it takes in an array of route objects as its argument. And so that's exactly what we're going to do, is just pass in this array of routes that we just defined right here in JavaScript. And we also see that it returns the element of the route that matched the current location. So this thing actually returns an element, and we can just slap that in right here, right where we were rendering our routes hierarchy before, hit save, and check this out. These 4 routes are working again. So basically, you can think of this routes component as a light wrapper around this useRoutes hook, which is going to be looking at the location and a set of routes to determine which route and therefore which corresponding element should actually be rendered. So that's kind of how this works under the hood. This way, we just have access to a little bit of a lower level primitive here that does the same thing. So here's the 4 routes that we had, but we're not quite back to where we were because we have these child routes that are not recognized right now. But we can add these 3 child routes just like we had before. And how do we do that in this configuration? Well, we just say children is equal to an array. And here's our child routes. And we'll do the same exact thing. These are objects with a path property of the path and an element property that points to what should actually be rendered. And so now we have those as children, and check that out, our nested routing is back. So we basically just refactored this from this routes to this JavaScript array, and now we're using the use routes hook. And we're right back to where we were. So we still have this bug with our nav link. So why the heck did we do that? Well, it's because we can now use this configuration inside of our nav link component. And the way we're going to do this is with another new primitive here, a function called match routes. So we can go ahead and auto import that. And if we take a look, we're going to see that this takes in an array of route objects, which we have, and it also takes in the location, the current location, which we have as well. So we can pass in our routes as the first argument right there, and we can pass in our location, which we have from useLocation right here. And again, if we look at what it returns, we see that it returns an array of route matches. So let's say let route matches equals this. And let's just log these route matches out and take a look at them in our app. Let's start with one of these simpler routes here. So we'll go to team. And we're getting 4 renders because we have 4 nav links being rendered. But if we look at the route matches, we'll see it's an array and it only has 1 element in it. It tells us basically which of our routes right here in our config matched against the current location. And it's giving us an object with a path name of team, no params, and then a route property which points to kind of the original object we used here in our routes configuration. And we can see here that the path name is team. That's the match. So you can start to get a feel for how this is working, right? We would expect to see this route match against projects. And if we go to dashboard, well, now our route matches goes up to 2 because React Router is actually matching against 2 of the routes here because of the child route that's matching, right? So the first match is going to be this root route here, our dashboard one, which has a path of / and it has 3 children. So that's this object right here. But then our second match is going to be the child route that matches, which is right here. It's also at path /, but it's actually this one on line 36 right here. So if we were to flip over to new users, we're going to see, again, the root route here for dashboard is matching. So again, conceptually, that's kind of what we want for this link right here, right? This is always matching because these are always children of this. And then the second match here is for /new users. And then again, we would expect to see sales match the third time. And we do. So conceptually, is active is not really if the location's path name matches this. It's if any of the route matches match against the 2 that we've passed in. So really we want to check through and iterate through this array of route matches and see if any of them have the right path name, right? So in this case, path name is / of the first one. In this case, even though the second one has gone to new users, the first path name here is still /. So let's try upgrading this. This is kind of our first implementation here. Our second one is going to say is active is going to equal our route matches, and we'll use .sum to see if any match has a match.pathname that equals our 2prop. Okay, let's check this out and see what it does. So our dashboard is active. We're on new users, we're on sales, we're on overview. So dashboard is staying active, but as soon as we go off, it doesn't match. So we fixed that issue. Now we see that there's another issue here. Overview is staying matched. But just to recap, this is pretty cool what we've already done. So again, we're not doing a naive comparison based on the fact that in our nav here, we're passing a slash, because otherwise, as we saw earlier, that would mean that dashboard stays active even as we go to team and projects, right? We're actually using the same logic that React Router is to know whether this first object matches, and if it does, then we should apply the active treatment. So this is definitely an improvement, but why is this overview broken? Well, let's take a look at our logic here. If we open this up and we click on overview, we're basically checking to see if any one of these match slash, and obviously on the first one they do, but what about when we go to new users? Well, when we go to new users, we have these two matches right here, one for the root route, which is the dashboard route conceptually, and then one for new users. But because overview here is mounted at slash, we actually don't have enough information to disambiguate and to say, this is a child right here, and this is the parent. Now, if you look here at our first match, we'll see that it has children. And so if we were to, do a little bit more work or annotate these routes with a little bit more information, maybe we would give this something like a name property of dashboard, and maybe this one something like a name property of dashboard.overview, something that would let us easily disambiguate these. Then we can make this work kind of more generally. You can see this is a pretty tricky problem, but in our case, one easy solution would be to add support for that kind of exact param. And that way, if we're not exactly on the slash here, then overview wouldn't be active. So let's come down to our overview link right here and just tell it that it should only match when it's exactly on slash. And so now back here in our nav link, we have a new exact prop. And really, if exact is true, we want to go ahead and fall back to our first implementation, which is just going to check whether the 2 is matching exactly the location path name. So I think we can consolidate these and we can say, go ahead and let isActive be declared. If exact is true, then we want isActive to be this. Otherwise, we want it to be this. Something like that. And now we see overview is only active when we're actually on the slash here. Dashboard stays active because it's just looking for any of the route matches. And now this is actually looking pretty cool. So you can see kind of solving this generally would be pretty tricky. This will actually work pretty well for child routes that aren't nested at the root. But if you were to go another level and have more child routes of overview, of dashboard overview here, you would want to do something like what I was talking about, where you have some more information here and you traverse this when you're determining whether something is active. Maybe we can do that in another video in the future. But again, when you're building these kinds of links components for your apps using these lower level primitives, sometimes the best thing you can do is get something that works for your use case so that you're not stuck and you have something working. And so far, this is working out pretty well. We can see here, we're able to get the active state on the primary nav and on the secondary nav. And we're going to see it takes us even farther than that. So this is a pretty good solution for now. And our active state is working just great. So I think we have time for just a few more cool things to explore from React Router v6. And to start, I want to go back to when we moved the dashboard here from slash to slash dashboard. So remember, we kind of started by doing that here and saying, let's go ahead and mount this at dashboard, and we'll change our link here in the header to go to slash dashboard, right? And that way, if we go ahead and visit slash dashboard in our URL, we can see it. The other links still work. But the problem is we've kind of broken things here, right? Because all of these child links, if you look down in the bottom left, you'll see they are coded with absolute URLs. And so if we actually did want to make this change, now we'd have to come back down here to our dashboard, go ahead and add the prefix right here, right? Like that. What if there was a better way? Well, there actually is with React Router v6, and that is we can use relative URLs instead of absolute URLs. So right here, instead of just hard coding this, because this is really a link to the overview relative to the dashboard here, right? And relative to the dashboard, it's kind of at the root. So we can use a relative URL there. We can use a relative URL here and here. And if we save that, now we can click on Overview and New Users, and we see that all this works as far as our rendering goes, right? So that's pretty cool because it lets us compose our app with these components that don't actually know kind of where they're mounted, and we can change that now in one place right here. But there's a problem, and that is that we've screwed up this nav link that we just worked so hard to get working. The active state is not applying anymore. And it's easy to see why. If we go ahead and log out the to prop that we're passing in and pop open the console, we're going to see here's all the links that we're rendering. Here are the 4 in the header, and here are the 3 secondary links, and those are the relative URLs that we just added, right? But we're comparing them to location.pathname and match.pathname. If we were to take a look at location.pathname here, go ahead and paste that in, we're going to see that this is always, you know, a full absolute URL, regardless of where we go in our app. So wouldn't it be cool if we could have all this working and still have our nav link work with the active state? Well, turns out we can with another cool primitive from React Router called useResolvedLocation. So this is another hook that we're going to import. And if we hover over this, we see that it takes one argument, a to. So we can just pass in our to prop right there. And if we look at what it returns, it says it returns a fully resolved location object relative to the current location. So let's just take a look at this. Let resolved location equals, and let's log out resolved location. So this is an object that looks an awful lot like the location object, has a path name. That's kind of what we're interested in here. But each one of these path names is, you know, a full URL. So if we were to just log out resolved location.pathname, there we go. We see our 3 kind of child routes of dashboard all being rendered, but it's the full absolute URL. So as long as we use this everywhere we were using to before, so let's just grab to right here and swap it out with resolved location.pathname. Check this out. We got our active state back. And now we can come down here and say, let's say we wanted to put this dashboard on new dashboard. So this whole thing is going to be on new dashboard. We just had to change it once. And we just have to tell our header link here that we want to go to new dashboard. So now let's start off the app at team. Click our new dashboard. And check that out. Our nav link is still working. All these links are working. I mean, this is really, really cool because conceptually, this entire thing has no idea where it's mounted within the application. I mean, it's almost like a separate application itself, and all it has are these links and rendering different dynamic content to the outlet here relative to wherever the parent is being attached. So I thought this was a really cool feature of React Router v6. I've never really worked with anything like this where you can use relative links like this, have it self-contained, speaks to the power of the library, and it feels really appropriate in React where one of the key ideas is composability and building components that just don't have knowledge of anything outside of themselves or where they're at. It's a really, really cool part of the library. So I like that it is working so easily. And I was also really surprised and kind of impressed that this nav link that we have is working as well. I mean, we're passing in relative URLs here, but we get to use this really cool resolved location hook, which is doing all this work for us. And the active state is working just great. So one more thing I want to show you, just because I thought, again, it was just one more really cool thing. And I think we have time for it here. Let's go one level deeper and make some third level of nesting routes here right in our new users child route. So I'm going to come here to our new users and go ahead and add another level of children right here. And we're just going to add one child, and it's going to have a dynamic path. So it's going to have a dynamic segment, and this is going to render, you know, some user detail page right here. So let's actually, instead of just these being these p tags, let's make them real components. So we'll close this, and let's start with the new users page. So we'll just say new users is a new component here. We'll return a div with a p tag, new users, and we'll render this component, new users. And right here, let's just render out some data. So let's get an array of 20 items, grab the keys, spread that onto an array, and we should be able to map over this and render out, you know, user index. Cool. Add some margin here. So now we have this kind of user list, and we want to make these links to link to our new dynamic path right here. So let's grab this, and we'll wrap this in our handy dandy nav link. And this will go to our index. And again, we can just keep using the relative links here and just pass in the index. Now, if we come over and check out our console, we'll see we have a couple errors. The first is we need a key prop. So let's just make React happy here. Key equals index. Should get rid of that. Second is that we have an invalid prop2 supplied to link. And that's because this index here is a number. It needs to be a string. So let's just kind of coerce this to a string like that. All right, we have no errors. And when we click, we see the URL being updated. So /2/0. Pretty cool. Again, we have the relative URLs here. We don't have to know or care who is rendering new users, where they're rendering it. I mean, it's really neat. You can imagine the reuse you get out of this, because this thing, again, all it cares about is that it's being rendered by something that has a child path with a dynamic segment in it. It doesn't care that it's a new dashboard or anything like that. Pretty cool. So we got the URL updating here. Let's actually render some dynamic content kind of in a master detail style. And so our new users component right here renders the list. Let's just do like a 2-column treatment here. So class name equals grid, grid calls to. This will be kind of our first column right here. And then our second column, we want to render the dynamic content, right? We want to actually render this user details element. So how do we render dynamic nested content in React Router 6? Well, we use the outlet component. So this is an example of us kind of using it again. We're using it once in our dashboard page right here to determine which of these second level routes to render. And then now we're using it in this third level to tell React Router, hey, let's go ahead and put this in the second column. So it's outlets all the way down, and that's how you do nesting. It's pretty awesome. It's kind of like this Russian doll style nesting that you might be familiar with from, you know, other frameworks or even backend frameworks. But this is basically how you do it. And so we're rendering user detail. How do we actually get, you know, the matched user, which param is active, over in our detail? Well, let's first go ahead and make an actual component for this. So function user detail, like this, return user detail, and we'll come up here and render this right here, user detail instead of the p tag. Make this a little bit bigger and bold, but we want to get the actual number, right? How do we do that? Well, we can just use params, another hook from React Router. So this is going to give us the params, and if we go ahead and log out those params, it's probably going to be just what you expect. ID 4. So the ID is coming from this dynamic segment where we defined our route, and 4 is coming from the fact that 4 is in the URL. So as we click around, we should get the correct ID here. So that means we can use this directly in our JSX and just say user params.id. And so now we've got this nice master detail. It's all synced with the URL. We can use the back button. We can refresh. Everything works. And again, our nav link just worked here with this dynamic segment. Now, what about our active class name API? Let's make the active class name TextGray 900 and the inactive class name TextGray 300. Check it out. Can even add another hover treatment here, hover TextGray 500. And just like that, Nav Link to the rescue. I mean, this is pretty neat. It's working with dynamic segments. It's working with nested routes. It's working with routes that are mounted at the index. We have the exact prop on there. And this is pretty cool. You know, when I started working with libraries in the React ecosystem, I was kind of hesitant to dive in this deep and use these lower level primitives from libraries like this. Because I felt like, you know, the library provides me a nav link, and shouldn't I just be using that? Won't mine not work as well? And of course you want to use something from the library when they give you something that works. But as you can see here, you know, the primitives that React Router provides you are really at different levels of abstraction. I mean, Nav Link is very high level, the one they provide you, whereas something like this match routes function that we used is much lower level. And they're doing that because there's a lot of use cases here and apps get complex. And, you know, even in this kind of relatively simple demo, we saw that there was a good amount of work to get all this stuff working. But once we did, we have this Nav Link that only uses things that we understand. And it feels really empowering to be able to build these up with these lower level tools. You know, I looked at the code base a little bit. It's really not that bad. I can show you right now. If you go to React Router on GitHub and you click on branch dev, this is going to be where V6 is at. And you can just pop in here, right in here to, you know, something like React Router DOM, come to the index, and this is going to be everything that's exported. So if we search for Nav Link, you're going to see right here, well, their Nav Link is just a wrapper of link that knows if it's active or not. And look at this, they're using location and resolve location. They're doing a little bit more, but not much more than we did. And, you know, we wanted to add this inactive class name kind of feature, this API to our Nav Link, and we were able to do that very simply. And so, again, as I've worked more in React, you know, I think the libraries in the ecosystem are more like this. They kind of embrace the lower level primitives that they expose to you and almost expect you to learn how to use if you want to be as productive and efficient as you can. And to me, that's something that I'm not necessarily used to, but it's also better than just being told, hey, you know, here's the nav link from the library. We support active class name, but you know what? We don't support inactive class name, because then you're just having to do some hacks to work around this. I think it's pretty nice to be able to be given the tools that you need to build your own nav link, add your own versions of the APIs like we did here. And now that we're a little more comfortable with these primitives like the match routes and the use route stuff, you know, it just kind of demystifies the whole thing a little bit more. And it feels really empowering and honestly kind of fun to build like this. So I hope you're excited about React Router v6 like I am. I think the nested routing stuff, the relative routes, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff here, and we didn't even cover everything that's coming out. So yeah, I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I got to get on a train. I got to get to Penn Station. I'm going to Annapolis for the weekend. Time to get out of the city. You know, it's just been kind of crazy here with the quarantine and everything. So I'm looking forward to a little mini vacation, but I hope you all are well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.